friends, good to see you again on In Conversation. Today we are meeting Kabir Bedi, the man who made a mark with his acting skills, not just in Indian cinema, but also made a career in Hollywood where he was a sensation, and of course, he was a superhero in Europe.
दुश्मनी को खत्म करने का एक और भी तरीका है रणधीर। दुश्मन को खत्म कर दो।
मीरा कहाँ है?
वो क्या है ना काली, मीरा बहुत प्यार करती है तुझसे। यहाँ होती तो तुझे और तेरे बाप को मरते देख नहीं पाती।
Are still at large.
He has abducted my son's fiancée. Not only that, he has stolen $2 million in cash from my casino.
And also now an author with this autobiography, Stories I Must Tell, The Emotional Life of an Actor. We also have the Hindi version of his autobiography here with us, Kahi and Kahi. And also joining us is Ajay Jain. He is a bibliophile himself. He is an author, he is a traveler, he is a photographer, and he's the founder of Kumsum Travel Cafe. And Kumsum is working on the promotion of Stories I Must Tell, Kahi and Kahi.
In my heartfelt autobiography, I bare my soul with emotional honesty, with stories about affairs and anxieties, milestones and mistakes, and successes that made India proud. Stories of heart-wrenching setbacks and how I survived the roller coaster journey by making, breaking, and remaking as a man. Stories I Must Tell is an emotional experience. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy Stories I Must Tell, the emotional journey of an actor.
Pleasure to have the two of you here on In Conversation on Doordarshan.
Thank you so much, Munmun. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is ours.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. Kabirji, this is the first book that has been penned by you.
Yes.
Take us back in time. What made you pen down your life story?
You know, Munmun, I knew I had a very interesting story, but I was paralyzed for years as to how to tell it. Because if I tell everything and all the incidents that happened, all the sets and all the people that I met and all the countries I traveled to and all these things that happened, I would have a 500-600 page book. Nobody reads 500-600 page books. So, and then so many stories overlapped, and then this kind of thinking of a war and peace kind of structure where your characters drift in and out in different stories, it became too complex for me. So I was paralyzed by that. When the pandemic started, and I suddenly realized all my film work stopped, all my voice work stopped, all my motivational speech stopped, everything stopped. I thought, okay, I've got time. So I forced myself to think. I figured out a way I would tell my larger story through a series of stories. Each chapter is a story into itself. Each chapter goes back and forth in time, but each story has a logic of its own. And I found that the most interesting way to tell the story. Something that would hold readers because they understand the dynamic of each story. And so finally I decided I must tell my story. I know how to tell it. And once I was clear, I just wrote like a madman through the pandemic, 10 hours a day, and I got the book done. You know, nobody has seen all my films. India has seen my Indian films and a few, maybe the James Bond film, maybe Bold and Beautiful, but all my American series have not seen. The Americans have not seen my Bollywood work nor my Italian work. And neither America nor India have seen all my work in Italy, which is the majority of my career. So nobody knows all my films, nobody knows all my life. What you've read of me is of different gossip magazines, different articles, different interviews I gave, but never enough to tell my whole picture. The background I have, my incredible parents, what happened in the relationships that I had that were so written about and so scandalized so many people, what happened in those things, what happened in my journey from Bollywood to Europe to Hollywood, all that had to be told. And so I said, if not now, when? If not me, who?
Absolutely, and this is indeed the story of your whole life, and there's so much diversity in your story which is reflected in the book. Having said that, I was thinking that since everyone who's read your book is saying that this is extraordinarily honest, that you've bared your soul, that you haven't held back at all. Was this a conscientious decision? Did you consider it like that over a period of time, or is that how you always wanted it to be?
I always wanted it to be like that because I said to myself, you know, truth is the best defense. Tell it like it happened and let the chips fall where they may. I have talked to my triumphs, I've also talked to my tragedies, I've talked to my strengths and my weaknesses. Where I was wrong, I admit I was wrong, but I told it as honestly as I could. Now, I've talked about, in relationships, I've talked about the relationships that were well known, that were publicized. Other relationships that are not known, I admit that I had relationships, that I was wrong to have those relationships, but I haven't named people who are living their own lives, minding their own business. So I admit my guilt, but who that person is, I don't think people have a right to know and ruin their lives. So I've been very candid in terms of my culpability. And I think it's important that, you know, because it's not just affairs, etc. It's dilemmas you face, crises you face in life. What happens in a relationship, only two people in that relationship know. What is the truth of what happened between Parveen Babi and me? What is the truth of what happened between Prathama and me, where we were the original bohemians of Bollywood. And we had this marriage, and it became a kind of flower power marriage that evolved into an open relationship. And how did that happen in a marriage? What are the consequences of that? How do you live with that? And what goes wrong with that? All those things I've explored very carefully. But I didn't want my book to be, I did this, I became a big star, I won this award, I went there, and then I went to Hollywood and did the Bond film. Nobody, your eyes glaze over if it's just a catalogue of your achievements. People want to know what happened and what went wrong. And people want to see you as a human being. It's very important. I put on above my computer, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And I was vulnerable. I allowed myself to be seen naked as far as what happened with me. Those are the important. So honesty was part of the deal I made with myself when I set out to write the book.
This is unusually candid. We haven't seen, I think, many biographies, autobiographies particularly, barely any. Ajay ji, what are your impressions? Because I know that you've had a lot of interactions on this particular book, Stories I Must Tell, with him, and your company in a way is promoting the book as well. So what are your impressions of the book as a whole?
I think we do see a lot of biographies, autobiographies and memoirs are going around, right? But a lot of them fall short of expectations because they're not open enough, they're not honest enough. And if as a reader somebody picks it up, you know, they want to, okay, not know everything, but they want to know something important. It shouldn't be a PR mouthpiece for the protagonist, right? And what's amazing about this book, like Mr. Bedi said himself, he's willing to, you know, kind of expose himself, right? Truth is the best defense. He's willing to be honest and then let the conversations happen, because then, you know, nothing's under the carpet, right? And that's the beauty of a book like this, and that's how personal stories have to be written, should be written, and that's when they'll get sold. Otherwise, if they do get sold, they're just getting sold to please somebody, and nobody's going to read those books. This is a book that's been written to be read, and it is being read.
Absolutely. I was struck by the cover, the handsome person that you've always been. And is there a story to this book cover as well?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. This photograph was taken by a photographer called Terry O'Neill. Terry O'Neill was the photographer of royalty, photographer of the biggest rock bands in the 60s and 70s. And I was 30 years old when this picture was taken. And I'd just come off the extraordinary, Beatlemania-like success of Sandokan, which where the series broke every record in Europe. And he agreed to photograph me, a big thing. He was like the Annie Leibovitz of his age. And he took this picture, and he looked at it and he said, when he handed it over to me, he said, Kabir, I've taken a lot of pictures, but this one's really good. So I kept the picture very carefully. And no matter where I traveled and moved homes from Rome to London to LA and back, I kept the picture. And when it came time for to choose the picture, I was thinking of a more contemporary, today kind of picture, me as I am. But my wife, Parveen, said, Parveen Dosaj, I hasten to add, who I've been with for 17 years, she said, no, you must use that picture. And I thought, okay, why not? It was a picture of me at in all my glory, at my best. Let that be the image that defines my book.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Terry O'Neill, great photographer.
Absolutely. Ajay, you've told us about your impressions of the book, but what have the readers been telling you?
I think the best response is, when you see the audiences who have been coming for the interactions. And in today's day and age, for people to step forward, go out in the physical space from the comforts of their homes to attend an event, right? It's just not because of Kabir Bedi, the superstar. They're coming because he has said something, they like the book, and that's why they are there. Because in today's day and age, no disrespect, we are surrounded by stars. Right, there are a lot of stars because of television and so many other media, right? But these people are coming forward for the love of the book. They're carrying copies of the book. They're buying copies of the book. They're getting them signed. It's not just a selfie moment. It's a moment of connecting with Kabir Bedi, the author, the star, and the human being.
True.
When one writes a book, one is never sure what the reaction is going to be. I thought hell might break loose. There might be all kinds of unpleasant reactions from people. Fortunately, it wasn't that. In fact, it won the Amazon Most Popular Book Award for 2021, and for biographies. And the Italian edition of my book won the Book of the Year at the Venice Film Festival, and it's been a national bestseller. So its success has been very gratifying. It means, to me, it means somewhere the pain or the trauma that I went through in reliving those scenes that made my life such an emotional cauldron has made it worthwhile. It was worthwhile to do that because the subtitle of my book is The Emotional Life of an Actor. And that's the key. I've told my story in very emotional terms. And there's some very, very emotional scenes in there between the women that I loved, between my parents, between my children, and even on the sets. There's people today want to be touched. The digital world is fine. It gives you a lot of information. It gives you a lot of entertainment. Infotainment is the name of the game. But I think there is a need for human interconnection, whether it's meeting people or whether it's reading a book that gives you insight into the life of a person, that some way helps you in your own life because you see either a universal truth or you see things to emulate or things to avoid. My God, he made that mistake. I must never make that mistake. Those are things in my book. It's not written as this is one of the lessons of my life. Never. There's no word of lesson in this book. The lessons are for you to take.
Sure.
Are for you to take. But I think touching people at a human level worked. And that's why my book has had the success it had. And now it's out in Hindi, it's out in Marathi, and I hope in other languages too. So I hope this communication that I wanted to make with people works in all languages.
Kabirji, you mentioned about your parents. You come from a very culturally rich background. Your parents, I understand, graduated from Oxford University and joined the freedom struggle. You've
Yes.
inherited Sikhism from your father,
Yeah.
Buddhist teachings from your mother. You've written about it as well.
Yes.
What was the kind of influence that they had on you and your writings?
You know, my parents were very remarkable people. Like you mentioned, they were in Oxford, and there were students. My mother was English, my father was Indian. And my father, and they were both very deeply concerned about the welfare of people, well-being of people. And my father proposed to my mother saying, I love you, will you marry me? But I can't promise you any security because I'm going back to India to fight the British, your people. You might have to spend all your days waiting outside jails. Are you willing to do that? And she said, I love England, I love my people, but I hate colonialism, and I will join you. Now, when she said that to my father, and he communicated it to his brother was a sessions judge. His brother was very upset because he thought he's sending his brother to Oxford on a scholarship and he'll come back and join the civil service, etc. He didn't realize this man would become a leftist, communist, freedom fighter, coming back with an English bride. Hello? Tauba, tauba. So my mother then wrote him a letter, and I want you to read a bit of that letter.
Yes, please read it
that
out
she
for
that
us.
she wrote him, because it shows the kind of love they had and the kind of thing. She said, writing to my Tayaji, my father's brother, she said, Dear brother, I know how it must seem to you when your dearly beloved brother makes a decision to marry someone who is a stranger to your land, to your family and your race. I can never be an Indian woman and cannot give him pure new children. Would that alone prejudice you against them? Baba and I are one country in spirit, and color is a union beside that. When I loved Baba first, it was not for the first time. We come together out of space. We have loved before, and we will love again after this. I repeat, there is one thing I cannot do, become an actual Indian woman. I know full well that some women of his own race will miss a perfect husband in Baba. But my spirit is with India and not with England, with Baba and not a man of my own country. My children will be an even greater bond. Will you deny me your perfect understanding for something I cannot help? It just happened that my soul is not in my country, but in another. Your sister, Frida.
How touching, and this is pure love.
Pure love, pure love. And that love, you know, is the remarkable thing about their lives, because they were divided by so many things, different temperaments. My father came back, became a flaming communist, trade union organizer, speeches, sent to jail. My mother was more pacifist. She was picked by Mahatma Gandhi to lead the satyagraha in our hometown in Punjab, Dera Baba Nanak. Mm-hmm. And she led the satyagraha against the British, her own people, and was imprisoned for it. And that was her part of the freedom struggle. So they had very different paths. And they gave up all possibilities of great jobs, had very little money, really sacrificed a lot. And after independence, my father became a very philosophical man and actually evolved a philosophy of his own. And he became a big philosopher in Italy. And my mother stayed behind in India, became a Buddhist, and by the end of her life, became the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. Mm-hmm. Yet, between them, there was this great bond of love. And somebody asked my mother, even after she wore the robes, do you love your husband, Baba? She said, love has different meanings than when you set out in life. love has different meanings in time. And obviously there was a great, deep love that united them. Even after my father remarried, when he went to Italy, in the sofa where he sat in his sitting room, his favorite sofa, opposite that there was a picture of my mother in her robes in front of him always. That was the strength of their bond. And if you read what my father wrote about my mother after she passed away, it'll bring tears to your eyes. That's one of the chapters of my book.
Absolutely, another compelling reason to read your book. Kabirji, you've written about your continuous search for the meaning of life
Yes.
in your autobiography. Now, there is one side of you which is full of glamour, and another side which is high on spirituality. You became a Buddhist monk. You met Acharya Rajneeshji. You met Dalai Lama, Pope John Paul II. J.
Jiddu
Krishnamurti,
Krishnamurti,
absolutely.
many of the great California teachers. Yes, there's always been a very spiritual side to me. And this, again, a lot of people don't realize. Firstly, because of my parents. My father was a descendant of Guru Baba Nanak, being a Bedi from Dera Baba Nanak. And he became a philosopher in his own right with a wonderfully mind-expanding philosophy. I won't get into the details. My mother gave me Buddhism because she was a seeker all her life. She found her truth in Buddhism. So Buddhism influenced me greatly. I became a Buddhist monk for 3 months of my life. That's also in the book. But I always had this question of what is the origin of it all? How did it all begin? You know, scientists say a little atom exploded and created the whole universe. And I thought to myself, okay, an atom exploded and created the whole universe, but firstly, where does the atom come from? Something can't come out of nothing. Something must have preceded it. And what gave it such force that it created a universe we cannot even begin to imagine the size of? So most people sense this as a higher being. Most people sense there's a God, a creator, something that created the universe. And instinctively they believe that. And for them, religion is an extension of their spiritual side. And I respect that greatly in all religions. But for me, the question was, what is the nature of that God? Because each religion gives them different aspects. There's the wrathful God, there's the kind God, there's the punishing God, there's a God that punishes you for your bad. What kind of... So all this is actually there's a chapter in my book on my beliefs and the beliefs that I've arrived at after a lifetime of searching. I won't get into the details of that. But in essence, I say it's all part of the dance of creation and we are all experiments in consciousness.
Absolutely. Can't agree more. The Beatles. How did that happen? You were a cub reporter with AIR, and tell us about your stint with Doordarshan as well.
You know, it's very emotional for me doing this interview for Doordarshan because I began my life with Doordarshan. So it's emotional. Because my parents were freedom fighters, they didn't have much money, but they sacrificed a lot, got us a good education. So I got the marks to get into St. Stephen's, but I didn't have money to pay the fees. So I started freelancing with All India Radio, reading news at night and doing English programs and interviews and commentaries. And I was the biggest fan of the Beatles in the world. And one day I heard that the Beatles had come into town. So I thought, fantastic, I'm going to get them. So I went to them and I said, my bosses, and I said, sir, I want to interview the Beatles. अरे कैसे पहुँचोगे? पूरी प्रेस पीछे पड़ी हुई है उनके. तुम कैसे पहुँचोगे बीटल्स के पास? देखिए साहब, आप मुझे टेप रिकॉर्डर दीजिए, बिल्ला दीजिए, मैं कोशिश करता हूँ, देखते क्या होता है. नहीं नहीं कैसे हो सकता है? आपका क्या जाता है? मुझे टेप रिकॉर्डर दीजिए ना. So they finally gave it to me. I went there. And how I managed to get this interview with the Beatles, exclusive interview, beating the entire press corps in Delhi, that's in my book. And what happened in that interview, where I was in the room with the Beatles at the Oberoi Intercontinental, and I was like walking on clouds, because these were the Beatles, man. They weren't just great musicians. They were symbolized the whole 60s, the flower power, the hippies, the freedom of relationships, the psychedelic clothes, the marching against the war in Vietnam. They symbolized all that. So it was a wonderful interview. And actually, eventually, I left Delhi because of the Beatles, because of what happened with that interview on All India Radio after they broadcast it. I won't get into details. You'll have to read the book for that. But it's the opening chapter of my book, and it's very interesting because it tells you a lot about the power of passion in a young cub reporter. It tells you about the setbacks you have to face. It tells you about making life-changing decisions that took me from Delhi to Bombay in search of a new life with 700 rupees in my pocket.
You also write about your late son Siddharth. What made you write about him?
You know, my son was a genius. He was a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, one of the finest universities of information technology, at the dawn of the computer age in 1995. He was 25 years old, 23 years old when he graduated. And then he was struck with schizophrenia. And how he battled to deal with his schizophrenia. And he was very bright, and he looked at the prospects of schizophrenia, which were far worse in those days than today. Today medicines are much better, so I don't want to give the impression there's no hope. But he realized that he would lead a very crippled kind of existence based on research in those days. And he started talking about suicide. And the battle that I, as a father, had to try and save my son from schizophrenia and save my son from thoughts of suicide, this battle that we had, battle means it was a battle of love, but it's chronicled in my book. And it's very important that people read this because, firstly, they should understand what schizophrenia is. More importantly, they should understand that the people afflicted aren't suffering pain, so they don't realize what's happened to them. People looking after them have to deal with them and have to compensate for what this strange behavior is. Because the person you love is not the person you knew. Something has changed. And dealing with that is very difficult. And yet families have to face the stigma of, "Arey, wo ladka pagal ho gaya unke ghar mein," and all this kind of nonsense. They should be given the greatest sympathy because they suffer the most, more than even the afflicted. So this chapter is really the struggle of a father to save his son from suicide.
Ajay ji, he's spoken about so many chapters. He's spoken about his late son Siddharth as well, and how this book is also an attempt to create awareness around mental illness and to give hope. Yeah. Which portion of the book has influenced you the most? Which is that particular excerpt or that chapter which is closest to your heart?
I would say that, like the whole story, is like kind of, because it's a series of stories within stories. And I think just talking about children touched me because I have children. They're, in their teens and 20s, and they've had their share of mental health problems. Right, I've been at a short notice. Personally, I've had to rush to the US and London because, like, the call I got was, "You're going to lose them." Right.
Wow.
So, fortunately, it wasn't so drastic, but it was scary. Right. My son is, as we speak, he's 18. He's undergoing a lot of treatment in London right now. Right, and I don't speak about it publicly, but the fact is that I think we are all of us parents are going through a very difficult time, and and when I look back, how, like, my relationship with my father was not a very good one, right? But I realized, but he was always there. He was always the rock. He was always patient. He was always forgiving. And now I realize that why he was like that. And so when I read about dealing with children, dealing with them having mental health problems, and mental health problems are something which are scary. Now I realize they're scary because you don't know what's happening. When there's a physical ailment, you can measure the brain we still don't understand.
Yeah, very true.
Right.
But I think it's important to look at that. But you know, my book is not just about heavy stuff. There's lots of fun stories in there as well. I remember my friend Omar Sharif, with whom I did 3 films. Omar was a very intelligent guy, very bright, and he would get bored very easily. And one thing he would do whenever we were shooting a film, he would go to the chef at the hotel we stayed and he'd plan a dinner, table for 6, table for 8, and he'd choose the wines, he'd choose the food, menu and everything else. Then during the day he'd say, Kabir, come and have dinner with me, Munmun, come and have dinner with me, Ajay, come and have dinner with me, and he'd make a table for 8. And this dinner would start. Now, it depended how the conversation went. If the conversation was interesting, Omar was all there. If it started to get boring, or if people started saying silly things, he would pick a fight. Because he loved to pick a fight. And he hated boredom. So to get over boredom, he would pick a fight. And these fights inevitably end. And if Omar Sharif picks a fight with you, what are you going to do? You're going to fight him on his table? People retreat. And the more they retreat, the more he attacks. And so it would always end up with either somebody leaving the table in tears, or Omar Sharif banging down the napkin and walking off in a huff. And this was the pattern he had. He tried it with me once, never again. We were friends after that for life,
Right.
because he knew he couldn't mess with me. But I saw him reduce so many people to tears. And that was one of his quirks. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. Omar Sharif to me was a kind of role model, because he was the first actor from the East, and I call him from the East because he's from Egypt, that actually went and became a big star in Hollywood. And I thought, if Omar Sharif can do it, I can do it. I never became a big star in Hollywood. I did a lot of very important films. I became a big star in Europe. But Omar always remained, like a role model for me, because he was the original poster boy of the foreigner going to Hollywood and making it.
कौन करेगा मेरा अंत? मुझे ले चल मुझे। सरवन, तू मुझे यहाँ कैसे छोड़ सकता है? सरवन, मुझे कैसे छोड़ सकता है?
Fantastic! Let's book our tickets to magical Jaipur.
Friends, welcome to our famous Trinidadian hospitality.
Mumtaz Mahal, the Taj Mahal. You cannot die while it lives on. But at what cost? At what cost? Thousands of hands bent and broken. Thousands of eyes gone blind with reckoning. Thousands of bodies ground into dust. Thousands of lives swallowed up in our lives to purchase the dream of one man, one woman.
Then make me understand! Justify sending those children into slavery!
At least the Tuaregs will give them food. They will give them work. They will be as part of the family.
Do you really believe that?
Then you take them back. I go to find Suleiman.
Dad, please.
You'll be fine, son. Just fine. I'll be close to you wherever you are. I love you.
Kabir ji, this book is subtitled as The Emotional Life of an Actor. What was the process of writing it like? You've told us that you spent 10 hours a day during the pandemic, you've completed the book. But was it like a catharsis? Were you overtaken by emotions when you were writing it? Were there tears rolling out? Were you, laughing in solitude? How was it?
All of the above, all of the above. Because, to write about these things, especially deeply emotional matters about my son, about my relationships, about times when I was against the ropes, even after all my success, when I lost everything, financially, emotionally, everything. And I was devastated. To write about that, you have to relive those moments. And to relive those moments is very painful because you'd hope to have left them behind as part of your experience, something you learn with time. So I had to kind of stir the pot of my emotions and let them come to the surface. But I believe that led to some very powerful writing, because I don't write in a lot of fancy words. I write very cleanly and evocatively. I was a copywriter, trained as a copywriter. So I have a great respect for economy of words. But I managed to convey the power of what happened in those moments in a way that really held people. And so, yes, it took me a lot to dig back in and come up with that. But I think the pain was worth it, given the way people have reacted to my book.
Absolutely. Ajay, your thoughts on that? There's not just a lot of diversity in the stories that he's written, but we also see that the art of writing is so vivid that the reader is transported to the scene that is being described. Was that like a double delight for you?
Yeah, I think as a writer myself, as somebody who, when reading can't help looking at any form of writing with a critical eye, I think it's stories are all around us, right? It's all about how you bring the story out, right? It could be, catch any everyday person, right? The way you write the story, it will suddenly seem the most interesting life on earth. It's the way it's written, right? So, and especially personalities like Kabir Bedi, they have so much to say, and he's right that he had to spend a lot of time figuring what to include and what not to include, and the styling became important because it's very easy to go on and on and on, like a personal diary, right? It would become an endless tome, and you would lose readers, right? And for me, for somebody who promotes books, who wants people to read, you can't afford to lose people halfway. It's like, you're watching a series on Netflix or on television, or you're going to a movie hall, right? After a few episodes or after half an hour of the movie, you walk away, right? You have to keep them gripped. So the art of storytelling is more important than the story itself.
Mm-hmm. So this is really a class in writing.
I tell people, your job is to buy my book and start reading it. My job is to keep you reading it.
Oh, wow, very well said.
That's why people call my book riveting, because once you start, you learn this as an actor in terms of how to hold an audience.
It's an unstoppable read.
Yeah. How not to let them go. How they want to know what's in the next paragraph, the next page. Because you create a kind of dramatic tension in the way you narrate the story. That is very compelling. And it's hard to not want to know what happened next. That's part of the art of storytelling, and I studied the short story form, which taught me a lot about the nature of storytelling and the importance of keeping a certain tension alive in the way you tell a story. Otherwise, if people think you're meandering, you lose them. And if you go into too many side streets from the main plot, ki ye bhi hua, phir wo hua, phir wahan hua, and you lose the main plot, people will lose interest again. How to keep people? So that's why I say, your job is to buy the book, start reading it. My job is to keep you reading it.
Absolutely. Unputdownable read. Since you've made your debut as an author and you are a screen person, so can we look forward to seeing a screen adaptation?
Well, I have had offers for the book. I haven't decided who I'm going to sell it to. I'm waiting till the end of summer to figure out who of the people that want it I will sell this to. But I'm sure it'll find a home here, in Italy or abroad. And I'm sure a very interesting series will be made out of it, because my life has been a roller coaster of emotions. From financial success, from fame, money, fame, power. I've seen them all come and go. That journey has to be a fascinating journey. But I'm going to leave that to them. I won't interfere in what they choose to do and who they choose to play the roles, etc. Because my job is to tell my story, their job is to interpret it. But I certainly hope to come out with a sequel of some kind at some point, because there were so many stories I had to leave out that those who've read this book would be fascinated to know other aspects of my life which are funny, evocative, thrilling, and stories I had to leave out because of length. So the reaction of people has given me the confidence to say, yes, I'd like to do a sequel at some point. I'm not sure it'll be my next book because I have too many other ideas, but there will be a sequel at some point.
This is just the beginning. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kabir ji. It was such a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much, Ajay ji, for joining us as well.
Thank you, Munmun, and thank you for inviting me on this Doordarshan program, which is where I began my career, from where I went from Delhi to Bollywood, to Hollywood, to Europe. The whole story started in Doordarshan. And I want to thank all the people that gave me the jobs that I got in Doordarshan, that helped pay for my college, that gave me that tape recorder to interview the Beatles, and that led to so many important changes in my life. I have many things to be very grateful to Doordarshan. So thank you, Doordarshan. And
thank you so
Munmun.
much. Thank you so much.
you,
And the
Munmun.
world is a small place. You're back to where you started.
Right.
Thank you.
तो तू वही है जिसने नगरवासियों को कर भुगतान के विरुद्ध भड़काया। इस युवा को इन अपराधों का दंड इसी समय मिलेगा, मरण दंड।
Any man brings me back those traitors, I will give him $1,000.
आग ऐसी लगा जिसमें खुद जलने का डर ना हो। इन्होंने मेरी क्रूरता देखी है, अब मेरी क्षमता देखेंगे।
Viva la revolución! Fire!
प्रेम तुझे निर्बल बना देगा मूजा। प्रेम नहीं, राज कर।
Per restare in piedi, un filo di erba non deve piegarsi né al vento dell'est né al vento dell'ovest.
सृजन का बेटा, सरमन सृजन का बेटा है।
Farti una doccia, riposarti, quello che vuoi.
मोहनजोदारो तेरा, तमाम सिंधु भूमि तेरी। जिस कुमारी को निहारेगा वो तेरी होगी, लेकिन पहले शस्त्र उठा मूजा और बहा दे रक्त उस नवलोकिनी का, उस पुजारी का, सरमन का।